Russia's Black Sea Fleet stronghold has reportedly been hit again. That's the claim coming out of Kyiv tonight, and if it holds up, it would be another entry in a 4-year pattern that has already cost this fleet ships, a submarine, and effectively its own home port. According to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, an overnight wave of Ukrainian strikes hit facilities tied to Russia's Black Sea Fleet. NBC News was among the outlets reporting his statement directly. As of this recording, no satellite imagery company, no Western Defense Ministry, and no independent photograph has confirmed the extent of any damage. So this video does two things. First, we lay out exactly what Zelensky said and how it's being reported. Second, we walk through the confirmed 4-year record of strikes on this same fleet, so you have real context for judging tonight's claim instead of just taking anyone's word for it. Here's what we actually know. Zelensky, in public remarks reported by NBC News, described a nighttime strike operation targeting infrastructure connected to Russia's Black Sea Fleet. He called the facilities a stronghold for the fleet and said the strikes caused damage. That's the extent of the confirmed statement. NBC News reported his words as his words, an official claim from the head of a state at war, not a verified damage assessment. Russia's Ministry of Defense had not, at the time of this recording, published its own detailed account of the incident. That gap matters, and we're not going to paper over it. Here's the thing about wartime damage claims. They almost never arrive fully formed. What usually happens is a leader or a general staff makes an announcement within hours, and then it takes days, sometimes weeks, for satellite imagery firms like Planet Labs or Maxar or open-source analysts publishing through outlets like Naval News and USNI News to independently geolocate and assess the damage. Until that process happens, what we have is an attributed claim, not a fact. We're going to keep using that word, claim, throughout this video, because precision here isn't optional. Something that stuck with me while reading through how this story broke. Zelensky didn't specify hull numbers, didn't name a particular vessel, and didn't give a casualty figure. That's actually notable. In some past Ukrainian strike announcements, officials have been more specific, naming a ship class or a base. Here, the language reported by NBC News stayed at the level of facilities and stronghold. We're not going to fill in that gap with guesses about what was hit. If Ukrainian or Russian officials or independent satellite analysts publish more specific details later, that becomes a separate, follow-up story. So why does a claim like this even matter if it's unconfirmed? Because it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It lands on top of a documented 4-year campaign that has already reshaped what Russia's Black Sea Fleet looks like and where it operates from. To understand whether tonight's claim is plausible, ordinary, or exceptional, you need that background. So let's go through the record. Go back to April 2022. The Moskva, the flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, a Slava-class guided missile cruiser built in the Soviet era, sank in the Black Sea. Ukraine said it hit the ship with 2 Neptune anti-ship missiles. Russia's government said an onboard fire detonated ammunition. Independent naval analysts, working from satellite imagery and the ship's final position, largely assessed that some kind of external strike was the likely cause, though Russia never confirmed that account. What's confirmed, regardless of cause, is the outcome. The flagship of an entire fleet went to the bottom of the Black Sea, the single largest warship loss for any navy since World War II. That is not a claim. That is a documented fact with wreckage, a known date, and international reporting. That single loss set the tone for what followed. Over the next 2 years, Ukraine, without a blue water navy of its own and without a single major surface combatant able to challenge Russian warships directly, built an unconventional campaign instead. Sea drones, uncrewed surface vessels packed with explosives and guided remotely, became the tool. In late 2023 and through 2024, Ukrainian naval drones, reported under names like Sea Baby and Magura, were used to strike vessels in and around Crimean waters and to damage the Kerch Bridge, the structure connecting occupied Crimea to Russia. In February 2024, Ukraine's military said its sea drones sank the Russian missile corvette Ivanovets near Lake Donoslav. Naval News and USNI News, working from video released by Ukraine's military intelligence and subsequent open-source analysis, treated that sinking as credible and well-documented, a rare case where the visual evidence left little room for dispute. Here's an obstacle worth naming directly. In a lot of these cases, the hardest part isn't finding a claim. Claims are constant, from both sides, every week of this war. The hard part is separating the ones with real evidence behind them from the ones that never get independently confirmed at all. Plenty of announced strikes over the past 4 years faded quietly, never followed up with imagery or wreckage. Others, like the Ivanovet's sinking, held up under scrutiny because video and satellite data lined up. That's the filter we're applying to tonight's claim too, and right now, it sits in the unconfirmed category alongside a lot of company. December 2023 gives us another confirmed case. Ukraine's Air Force said it struck and destroyed the large landing ship Novocherkassk in occupied Feodosia in Crimea, reportedly using Storm Shadow cruise missiles supplied by the United Kingdom. Satellite images published afterward showed visible destruction at the port facility. This one, too, moved from claim to confirmed fact within days, once independent imagery caught up with the announcement. And a few months before that, in September 2023, Ukraine struck the Sevastopol shipyard directly, hitting the submarine Rostov-on-Don and the landing ship Minsk while they sat in dry dock. Again, satellite imagery afterward showed both vessels damaged, and this became one of the most visually confirmed strikes of the naval campaign. Put those three events together, the Moskva, the Sevastopol dry dock strike, the Novocherkassk, and you start to see why the phrase Black Sea Fleet stronghold carries real weight, and also why Ukrainian claims about hitting it get taken seriously by analysts even before independent confirmation lands. The next part of this story isn't really about any single strike. It's about geography. Sustained pressure on Sevastopol, the historic home port of Russia's Black Sea Fleet since the 18th century, pushed Russia to relocate a large share of its surface fleet roughly 200 kilometers east to Novorossiysk, starting in 2023 and continuing through 2024. That relocation has been documented repeatedly through open-source satellite tracking, cited by the UK Ministry of Defence's regular intelligence updates and by the Institute for the Study of War in its daily assessments. Ukrainian officials have gone as far as describing this as a de facto defeat of the fleet in its own home waters, a navy with a home port it can no longer safely use. Independent analysts are more careful with that framing, noting that Russia's Black Sea Fleet still operates, still fields vessels, and still launches cruise missiles from ships in the Black Sea toward targets in Ukraine. Both things can be true at once: a fleet that has been pushed back geographically and a fleet that remains operationally active. I spent time going through how outlets like USNI News have tracked this relocation month by month, and one detail kept standing out to me. The movement wasn't a single dramatic evacuation. It was gradual, ship by ship, over roughly a year, driven by a slow accumulation of successful strikes rather than any single knockout blow. That pattern is worth holding on to, because it's the same pattern tonight's claim would slot into, if confirmed, not a single war-ending strike, but one more data point in a long attritional campaign. That gradual pattern also explains why one specific consequence of this campaign became visible far beyond military circles. In mid-2023, Russia had effectively imposed a blockade on Ukrainian grain shipments after withdrawing from the UN-brokered Black Sea Grain Initiative. But as Ukraine's strikes degraded Russia's ability to safely patrol its own claimed exclusion zones, Ukraine opened an alternative shipping corridor hugging its own coastline and that of NATO members Romania and Bulgaria. By 2024, Ukrainian grain and cargo exports through that corridor had substantially recovered, according to Reuters reporting on Ukrainian port and shipping data, a civilian, economic outcome directly downstream of a military campaign against a stronghold most viewers never see on a map. Here's what this tells us about the broader war. Naval power in this conflict has stopped looking like traditional ship-to-ship combat almost entirely. Ukraine has no aircraft carrier, no destroyer fleet, no submarine force to speak of, and yet it has materially constrained a large conventional navy using missiles, sea drones, and persistent pressure on fixed infrastructure, ports, dry docks, fuel depots. That's not a small story. It may be one of the bigger naval developments of this decade, precisely because it didn't require a single big warship to pull off. Here's the take that might get us some pushback. We think the framing of Russia's Black Sea Fleet as defeated gets thrown around too loosely, and it undersells what's actually impressive here. A fleet that still has ships, still fires, missiles, and still holds a functioning port at Novorossiysk isn't defeated in any conventional sense. What's actually happened is narrower and, honestly, more interesting. A materially weaker navy denied a much larger one the free use of its own historic home waters, using assets that cost a tiny fraction of a single warship. Calling that a defeat flattens a genuinely unusual military story into a headline. Calling it constrained or degraded or pushed back is more accurate and more remarkable if you think about what it took to do it. So where does tonight's specific claim fit into all of that? Honestly, we don't know yet, and neither does anyone publishing about this within hours of Zelensky's statement. It could turn out to resemble the Novocherkassk strike or the Sevastopol drydock hit, a real event, confirmed within days by imagery, and folded into this same documented pattern. Or it could turn out to be one of the announcements that never gets independent confirmation at all, which, as we said earlier, has also happened more than once in this war. Both outcomes are plausible. Neither is confirmed right now. What would you have made of this claim if you'd seen the headline alone, without any of the 4 years of confirmed strikes behind it? Would you have taken Zelensky's word for it, waited for satellite images, or assumed the opposite? That's a genuine question, not a rhetorical one. A lot of people form an opinion on strike claims within minutes of seeing a headline, in either direction, and we think that habit is worth examining in yourself. There's also an open question that goes beyond this single incident. What happens to a fleet that keeps losing access to fixed infrastructure but never loses its ships in bulk? Novorossiysk isn't invulnerable. It sits within range of some of the same weapons that hit Sevastopol, but it's also further from Ukrainian-controlled coastline, which changes the math for future strikes. If tonight's claim is confirmed and it turns out to involve facilities near Sevastopol rather than Novorossiysk, that would suggest Russia still bases meaningful assets at the more exposed port despite years of pressure. If it turns out to involve Novorossiysk, that would be a new and arguably more significant escalation, since it would mean the safer relocation hasn't fully solved the exposure problem either. We genuinely don't know which of those, if either, applies here. One more obstacle worth naming honestly. Russia's government has a strong incentive to minimize public acknowledgement of successful strikes on its own military infrastructure, and Ukraine's government has an incentive to maximize the perceived impact of its own operations. Neither side is a neutral narrator. That's exactly why outlets like USNI News, Naval News, and independent satellite imagery analysts matter so much in stories like this one. They're not aligned with either government, and their standard practice is to wait for geolocatable evidence before calling something confirmed. We'd encourage you to do the same and to treat any single-source claim from either side with the same patience. So, where does this leave us? What's confirmed? Russia's Black Sea Fleet has suffered a documented, multi-year campaign of losses and relocations from the sinking of the Moskva in 2022 through the Sevastopol drydock strike, the Ivanovets sinking, and the Novocherkassk strike, all independently verified through satellite imagery and open-source analysis. What's claimed but not yet confirmed, that a new overnight strike, described by President Zelensky and reported by NBC News, hit facilities tied to that same fleet. What's genuinely unknown right now, the location, the scale, the specific targets, and whether independent imagery will back up the claim in the days ahead. We'll be watching for satellite imagery and follow-up reporting on this specific claim, and if it's independently confirmed, we'll cover exactly what changed and how it compares to the strikes we walked through today. We didn't include a breakdown of Novorossiysk's actual defenses in this video, since that's really its own story. Comment Novo if you want us to cover how Russia has tried to protect that relocated fleet, and we'll read every comment on this one. If you want the full picture of how a navy without a single major warship has spent 4 years constraining one of the largest fleets in the world, that's the story behind the story here, and it's still being written in real time.